everyone, Denise here. My goal today is to create some glow-in-the-dark yarn. I'm going to be using this yarn that I purchased from Michael's called Craft Smart, and the Tulip paint I'm going to be using is called Glow in the Dark. It is 4-ounce bottles, 118 milliliters. Going to use 2 bottles for this entire huge skein of yarn from Craft Smart, 718 yards, 655 meters, 400 grams. The first thing I'm going to do is put the yarn into hank form on my umbrella swift. So that's what I'm going to get started doing right now. Okay, we start by putting part of the yarn on a section here and tying just so that it doesn't come loose. And then we just go ahead and hold it to the side and spin the umbrella swift. And this will make the yarn wrap around quite nicely. That's why it was designed this way. Just so it can move freely and spin so that you can turn it and put the yarn into hank form instead of ball form. Because when we're dyeing yarn, for the most part, unless you're doing something specific with a ball of yarn, you want to go ahead and have it in hank form to absorb as much dye as you possibly can get on the yarn, and this is the best way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spin this, and I'm going to get all of the yarn onto the umbrella swift in hank form, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we're at the point where I have half of the skein of yarn on the umbrella swift because it is a lot of yarn, and I wanted to split it in half just to make sure that I had a good proportion to the paint to the yarn, if that makes sense. I didn't want a huge, see, if I kept going, this would be double the amount that I have here. And I wanted to make sure that I would be able to get paint to all the fibers of the yarn. So I stopped here, and this is where we first tied. So you just want to join your first tie that you put here to your end tie, and then I'll show you the next step to make sure that our yarn doesn't tangle like crazy. So just a second and we'll do the next step. So this step is to make sure that our yarn does not tangle when we are going to paint it. So when we're shifting it around and moving it around in the paint, these can get all tangled up. So what we need to do is we need to take, I have wool, and I'm going to weave it in like an infinity loop through the yarn so that it is getting to, every piece of yarn will be gathered into sort of sections, but we're going to take this out at the end. So just weave it back and forth, and we're going to take the top. And we don't want this tight because we want the paint to be able to hit all of this yarn in here. So we want to make it to where it's loose, but yet not too loose, because we don't want our yarn to tangle. So I'm having a little bit of a difficult time trying to not be in the way of the camera and yet get the job done. So this is much easier on a smaller amount of yarn, but I'll get it. So when you're done, you want to be able to identify your extra yarn that you use to separate, and that is why I'm using a different color of yarn so that I can find it. It won't be dyed. Not that glow-in-the-dark yarn would make a big difference, but it won't be dyed, and you'll be able to snip it without worrying about snipping your yarn you just dyed. So I'm going to tie this, and then I'm going to tie my beginning part here to this yarn so that it stays together as well. And then I'm going to repeat the same process. I have 4 of them here, so I'm going to do, how about here, and maybe here, and then here. And that's more just to make sure that it doesn't get tangled because there is so much on this hank. Normally I would just do 2 sides of the yarn, but I'm going to do 4 this time just to make sure I don't have a mess. So on to the next part after I get done with that. Okay, I just wanted to show you that when I do the infinity loop that there is still plenty of room. You can see the yarn moving around. You don't have to worry about the color not getting to these strands because it can move freely. So that's the reason why we want to keep this a little bit loose, but not tight, because you want the dye or the paint or whatever you're using to change the color of the yarn to be able to penetrate in these fibers. So on to the next step. Okay, so right now I have the hank of yarn soaking in the sink water. It's just plain water, and I'm going to soak that for about 10 minutes just to make sure that all of the fibers of the acrylic yarn gets wet and gets ready to be painted. And then I will go on to the next step. Okay, so the yarn has been soaking about 10 minutes, which is plenty of time. We just needed it to get soaked completely. And now I'm going to gently squeeze out the excess water. Okay, so I squeezed the excess water out of the yarn. Now I added some water to a bowl, and I'm going to add the paint to the bowl. But with this paint, you see it's more like a little squeezy top. So I'm gonna pull this part out so that I can get the paint into there a lot easier than just waiting for the tiny squeeze part to get it all out. Okay, so I got the top out. As you can see, I just pulled it out with my pliers. And now I'm going to squeeze this entire container of glow-in-the-dark paint into this bowl. And then I'm going to add the yarn to the bowl. Okay, so as you can see, my water is like a milky looking water now. It looks like maybe I poured milk into my water. So the paint is now all inside of the water mixed around, and now I'm going to add yarn to that. And I'm going to squeeze it down in here so that I can get all of the paint into the yarn and let it soak that up. Now the instructions on the container for the paint says if you put this on fabric, it's fabric paint. So if you put this on fabric and let it sit for 4 hours, then you're going to end up with a permanent result, and do not wash it for 72 hours. So that is my goal. My goal is to get it into the yarn, leave it for 4 hours, and then not wash the yarn for 72 hours. And I want to see the results after trying to wash it, just to see if it washes out. I also want to see what this feels like after I get the paint in the yarn, because I'm curious if it's going to make it sort of crusty. I'm worried that it's going to make it crusty. Now the reason why I am dyeing this yarn is so that I can possibly make some hats with maybe a skull motif in them. And then at night, when there's no lights on, or just a little light on, or maybe even like if you like black lights and they're on when you're wearing your hat, it will glow in the dark. So I'm going to keep working at this, and then I'm going to let this sit for 4 hours. So I'm going to just let it sit in the water, and then I'm going to go ahead and start rinsing it. But I'm not going to wash it like I normally would when I dye yarn. I'm just going to go ahead and rinse it out, rinse the excess out, and then go from there. So, okay, real quick. I'm done mixing. I'm going to leave it sit this way for a while anyway. But every once in a while I'm going to come and I'm going to tap it down to make sure that it's all getting absorbed all in the water. But I just wanted to do a little test to see how glow in the dark it is, since I've been messing around with it. under the lights. I wanted to see if it glows in the dark right now. So here we go. Ta-da! Very cool. So hopefully when I'm done, it will be actually in the yarn and it will work up the same way. So I'm excited to find out how it all turns out. Right now, just FYI, it smells like paint. Obviously, I'm using paint, so it's gonna smell like paint, but it does not smell good. I'll just say it doesn't smell good. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're sensitive to smells and you don't want something you're wearing to smell like paint. I'm guessing in the end this is probably going to smell somewhat like paint when I'm done. So anyway, on to the next step. Okay, it's been about 2 days since I dyed the yarn and it is completely dry, and I was feeling on it, and it's a little stiffer than it was to begin with, and some spots are stiffer than others, and I think that's where it's absorbed the dye or the paint more. But it doesn't feel terrible. It doesn't feel like I can't work with it or use it. And I think once I put it into a cake or a ball and kind of work with the yarn a little bit, it will probably soften up as well. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. And if you want to, subscribe and like this video and stay tuned for more. Until next time.